Hello, I'm George White, and this is What's Left. I'd like to introduce Sean Halsall, co-host.
Hi, George. How you doing, mate?
You all right, Sean?
Seems like an age since we've been here, mate.
I know. Everybody's been ill.
Absolutely. Without further ado, we're going to be talking tonight to one of the FBU Brigade Secretary, Ian Hibbert from Merseyside, talking about what firefighters, how they skew more to the left. Is that true, or is it just the sort of squeaky wheel gets the oil? So without further ado, welcome Ian.
Hello guys, how you doing?
Hi, Ian.
How's things, Ian?
Not too bad, mate. Yourselves?
Yeah, good, mate. Good. It's like I said, we've had a couple of weeks gap, but back to it now.
Good stuff.
Back to it. So, what is your position in the trade union in the Northwest, Ian?
I'm currently the Brigade Secretary for Merseyside Fire Brigades Union. Obviously, I'm a lay official. I'm a firefighter. I've been a firefighter in Merseyside for 22 years.
Excellent. So, what does the role of the Brigade Secretary entail, mate? Just before we get into it, for those who know.
Essentially, it involves dealing with absolutely everything. Obviously, we deal with all matters of consultation, negotiation, whether that's duty shift systems, whether it's contractual issues. We deal with disciplines, grievances, and probably a lot like a lot of trade union officials, a huge amount of our time is taken up with, I think, what can only be described as pastoral care for members who are struggling.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. So, what sort of membership have you got in the Fire Brigade Union for workers? What's your density and why is that way it is?
Across the country, I think we're above 90% density for the Fire Brigade Union. I think it's about 33,000 firefighters in the UK, and we represent north of 90% of those members now.
Excellent. So, what do you think? Why is it so important that firefighters are in a union first before we get in, and what do you think draws people to the FBU particularly?
Again, I suppose it is the fact that we do represent the vast majority of members. We are the only union within the fire and rescue service who have bargaining rights when it comes to pay. The terms and conditions of firefighters are negotiated by the Fire Brigades Union and representatives from the national employers at what we call our National Joint Council. So really the only way to have any sort of effect on our terms, our conditions, our pay, it is to be part of that union and to be represented.
Absolutely, yeah, so important. You got anything you want to say there, George?
Well, I was just gonna. It's more just speculation than necessarily fact, but I was talking to my wife before we came on air about why I thought firefighters would necessarily be left wing, and it just occurred to me that people become firefighters not out of greediness and wanting to get ahead, but they obviously choose that vocation because they want to help people, they want to save people. So it's not a trait that lends itself to me first and everybody else get behind me sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like a lot of people who work in public sector, people who work certainly in the emergency services. The vast majority of us, we understand that you take these jobs, you're never going to get rich. There's a very small minority who make it to the top who do eke out a very healthy living for themselves. But that is, I think, something that runs right the way through. You see people have always wanted to do these jobs because they want to help people. And I think, to be entirely honest, and specifically for firefighters, it's why we are so we work so hard to defend those jobs. We work so hard to defend those terms and conditions because all we do is we come to work. We want to help people.
Yeah, it's not a normal job, and that you very much are at risk every time you sort of go into work for the day, aren't you? And you're relying on the person next to you, and again, it's hard to be sort of right wing thinking and about the individual if you're relying on each other to keep yourselves alive. Similar to the miners as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things. That sort of camaraderie, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, whatever you want to call it. As melodramatic as it may sound, on any given day, at any given moment, the person who's sat next to you could be the difference between whether you go home to your wife, your husband, your mum, your dad. So we have to be able to trust each other, and I think that does build that comradeship.
Absolutely. So yeah, we were talking a bit before we came on about the sort of politics around sort of firefighters, and you'd mentioned it's maybe more so in the leadership, and people tend to come with you rather than it being broadly sort of this bastion of socialism. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like any workforce or a large group of people, I think in this day and age, we are a broad church. But I think, for a lot of the reasons that you've sort of discussed there, we do lean to the left. I think firefighting, it is, we always talk about this, within Merseyside where I work, we work within some of the most socially deprived areas, Europe. And we managed to gain entrance to, almost everywhere. People like us, people are always happy to see us. We can go in and we can make meaningful intervention, into the lives of some of the people, who are struggling the most in society, because people like us, they suspect, they respect us, they're happy to see us. In as much as, where firefighters lean politically, sort of across the spectrum, as we said before, we are a broad church. There are a range of varying views, as there always are. But I think some of the things that affect firefighters, they are the things that are the sort of preserve of the left, the people that we come into contact with constantly, whether we're working in deprived communities, when we talk about climate change, again, something that's considered generally to be, the hobby horse of the left. It's the stuff that affects firefighters. We saw the summer before last, and they had to turn your telly on, and everywhere south of Birmingham was on fire. This is climate change, and these are the things that affect firefighters. And I guess so a lot of the political stuff that we are involved in, that members seem to resonate with, it's because there's stuff that they can identify with on a daily basis. They can identify with seeing people who are struggling. They can identify with seeing, the impact of climate change and all those things. I think that moves us to the left naturally.
It also seems that certain things that you go to, if you go to the trade union congress and different cross union meetings, it seems that the FBU have quite a large voice for quite a in membership, quite a small union. So it does seem that the FBU is highly respected in the movement as well on that basis, I think.
Yeah, and as you said, it was something that was said to me when I first sort of started getting involved within the trade union, then brigade secretary, who's now our national officer, Mark Rowe. What he said to me is, we are a very small union, about 33,000 members, but we are very well respected, and we do punch well above our weight, I think. And that's always something that's stayed with me.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's and just for the record, for the listeners, the FBU have always been extremely supportive of me personally and in politics. Not that it's always gone the way I'd always like at times, but the FBU have been solid comrades and absolutely fantastic. It's anything there, George?
Well, I was just going to ask: is there anything at the moment that's happening that you'd like to talk about, Ian? I know that you said just previously there was a strike averted just before Christmas.
Yeah, again, like any industry, we're subject to cuts. I think since 2010, we've lost about 20% of the firefighter numbers, within the UK. We're not immune to that locally. When I joined the fire service in 2002, we had about between 1,350 and 1,400 firefighters working in Merseyside. There's now around 600. So in that 20 odd years, we've reduced by over half the number of our members. Some of this has been down to, as you can imagine, Tory imposed austerity, Merseyside, amongst other places that have always been considered, a Labour stronghold. It's no surprise that we've taken the brunt of the sort of Tory vengeance when cuts have come in, when grants have been cut. Some of the stuff that we've been dealing with recently isn't so much funding driven. You mentioned the strike that was just averted prior to Christmas. We did a lot of there was a lot of press on this. There was a lot of social media stuff. What we were telling people was this wasn't money driven. There was nothing saved by changing, making the changes that have been made, albeit, we've managed to come to an agreement over some of them, which was acceptable to our members. This is just about the drive for change for the sake of change. We're moving now towards a consultation on what's known in the fire service as a community risk management plan. And this is essentially where the chief fire officers in whatever fire service they're in and their local governors, whether that's an authority, whether it's a PFCC, or in the case of Manchester, it's a Metro Mayor, they set out what they would like to do in the future. Some of the things that we have coming our way in Merseyside is there is a proposal to reduce the number of firefighters riding on a fire appliance to what they call non-life risk incidents. Now, they want to reduce that from a minimum of 4 down to 3. The position of the Fire Brigade Union is quite simply that it is not safe and it is putting our members at unnecessary risk. The systems of work, as you described before, that keep our members safe, that allow us to, go into work and essentially to come home alive on the worst possible day. They have been fought for years off the deaths of firefighters. None of them have been handed to us freely. All the sorts of safety measures that we have in place are there because firefighters have died. And in looking at bringing in policies to paper over the cracks so we can still turn out a fire appliance, albeit without enough people on it to crew it safely. I'll be entirely honest, it's scandalous and it's something that we are going to fight tooth and nail to prevent.
And something that isn't driven by any, as far as I understand, houses aren't less likely to burn down. I think probably over the timescale you were saying over the previous couple of decades, there's probably a lot more houses in Merseyside than there would have been. And then where you say that the effects of climate change have made your moor fires and forest fires and things a lot more likely to happen as well in the meantime.
Yeah, and it's the other plethora of work that we undertake on a daily basis. So obviously, we have a fire, we receive statutory government funding for tackling fires. An example of something that we receive no funding whatsoever for from the government is flooding. So when you've seen on the news pictures of firefighters in dry suits, taking people out of houses on inflatable rafts and wading through water and stuff like that, we still receive no statutory funding from the government to undertake those tasks. Just before Christmas, we launched the Firefighters Manifesto, and this was essentially a national campaign about refunding the fire and rescue service, about replacing the thousands of jobs that have disappeared since 2010, and about understanding and engaging with us on the issues, such as wildfires, such as flooding, climate events that are happening more and more frequently, yet still for a lot of it, we receive no funding to undertake it.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And it's like you alluded to, it's sort of people coming in with a business mentality and trying to create efficiencies where you can't possibly have an efficiency. It's demand led, isn't it? It's not like you can get more growth in the business with what you're doing. It's a house is on fire, you go respond to that. A flood happens, you go respond to that, etc. It's absolutely wild to think that these people can come in with this sort of business mentality and sort of impose that on you.
Yeah, it just doesn't carry over. You look at it logically, and as you say, we are demand led. We do huge amounts of community work. We do huge amounts of, preventative intervention work. We go out, we fit smoke alarms, we give fire safety advice. We go and speak to kids. We do all of these things. But ultimately, a little bit like the NHS, being free at point of need. When you pick up the phone and you call for a fire appliance, you need a fire appliance. In the same way that, some of the stuff that's been broached in certain areas in the UK is around firefighters co-responding. Now, this is around firefighters attending, heart attacks, cardiac arrests, stuff like that. Now, it is something that nationally, we are given to consideration, as a union, about what early intervention we can make to help and assist people. But ultimately, if you ring 999 for an ambulance, you want an ambulance and you want a paramedic or two paramedics on that ambulance. Firefighters, should we end up doing that kind of work, we will come, we will assist, but our knowledge and our ability is incredibly limited when you stand us next to a paramedic, who have done a 4-year degree, a 5-year degree, whatever it is, it escapes me, to go and render that assistance.
Yeah, and you wouldn't be happy if a paramedic turned up to put a fire out in your house either, the same sort of way flipped. It's madness. And again, that I think comes from this business ethos of having everyone multi-skilled and everyone can do everything and we can get efficiencies there, and it just doesn't work. You end up with a workforce without the training needed for that job specific role.
And as well, even without cuts, there's already tacit cuts, because the more houses there are, the more ratepayers there are, the more people who will need covering, if it's their homes or if it's they're driving up and down the roads and have accidents. It's already been cut by virtue of there are more people likely to call upon the services of the fire brigade.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look, so you take the reduction in firefighters just in Merseyside alone since 2002, we've been cut by over half. Now, think, how well Liverpool again. Think of the regeneration that has gone on within Liverpool city centre since the year 2000. Think, we now have, ocean-going cruise liners coming up the Mersey. We have a huge university campus population. You just have to look at the skyline, as we're throwing up high rise after high rise after high rise. We have 2 major football stadiums. We have a huge conference centre. There are huge numbers of people pour in and out of Liverpool, on a daily basis. And that's even when we haven't got events on. And you look at the drastically reduced fire service that we have in comparison to what those risks looked like 20 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw not in too long ago the car park at that conference centre, didn't we? And am I right in saying that the closest 2 fire stations weren't manned when that happened? Or am I wrong there?
No, the closest one was staffed at the time. Again, that was one of those incidents which by the time we'd gotten to it, there was very little, that could have been done to prevent it. Again, there is a case to be made that, had we had more fire appliances immediately available, ready to go, we may have been able to make a difference. However, it's just speculation.
Okay.
And just that particular incident as well, and it seems to be a prevalent thing. Whereas ordinarily technology, you would imagine, makes things safer and less likely to catch fire on their own. The electric cars have seemingly got a problem, haven't they?
Yeah, the lithium-ion batteries are, an issue that is being faced by fire services, not just in the UK, but across the world now. Essentially, I won't go into the science behind it, but essentially the crux of it is once these things catch fire, they're nigh on impossible to put out. We have fire appliances tied up sometimes for hours and hours on end, attempting to just put a car fire out. Something which ordinarily with a petrol car or a diesel car would be done in an hour. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we're having to tie up an appliance and a crew for 12 plus hours just to literally pour water, because essentially once the water stops, the reaction continues. It continues to burn. There are lots of companies looking into solutions to this. I know there are places in Europe where they essentially have large open top containers. So if you have one of these car fires, they will turn up, they will pick it up on a crane, and they will just submerge it in essentially a large tank of water, which will put it out. But obviously it's not really an easy or straightforward method to adopt everywhere.
Doesn't seem very cost effective. So what sort of forged your politics and your personal politics? Aside from that, how did you find yourself where you are on the political spectrum?
I'll be entirely honest. I mean, I joined the fire and rescue service when I was 18 years old. I really had a couple of part-time jobs, come out of college, still living at home with my parents. And I was basically put into a world where, as we've said before, the majority of the workforce was unionised. My first sort of dealings within politics were, again for you, Sean, it wasn't a great day for the Labour Party. We went through a pay campaign in 2002, with Tony Blair government, and they gave us an absolute torrid time. Essentially, painting firefighters as, lazy, greedy people who have two jobs, and they're just having the public on. So I'll be honest, that, tarnished my view, of sort of, Labour, New Labour as it is, the two very distinct things, as you know all too well. So moving on from that, I started to get involved within the trade union. And I think this is the big thing that sort of influenced my politics. As we said before, it wasn't about, and not just about doing a job where you do that job for other people, you do that job to help other people. It was doing a job with other people who were working with a union to try and improve that for everybody else. And with the same within a lot of industries, I sort of started to get involved a little bit. I started to go to meetings, I took a branch rep's job, and, you slowly get drawn into these things. And the further along you get, the harder you find to sit and just say nothing. The harder you find it when somebody comes out and, either behaves in a manner that's not appropriate, or, they try to bring in policies, procedures that clearly aren't fit, or they're not suitable, and they're potentially dangerous. All of a sudden you find that, you can't just sit there and say nothing. Again, it's a strange dynamic within the fire and rescue service, because ultimately we are a uniformed service. So there is, a fair degree of discipline, involved within that. I sit as the brigade secretary for Merseyside. I am a firefighter. Yes, I have to sit on opposite the negotiation tables with the chief fire officer, or, any other range of service managers who all outrank me. And whilst sat on a fire station, all have the ability to tell me that they want me to do X, Y, and Z. And unless I'm being asked to do something which is unsafe or improper, I have no choice but to do as I'm told. Yet I go and sit within those meetings, not as just a firefighter. I sit there as the representative of 600 firefighters. But it's a strange, it's a strange sort of dynamic to get your head around when you first start, because it's, sort of ingrained within you that, we are a ranked, uniformed service, and, these individuals are in charge. You are not, if you get what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's something both me and George would be well au fait with. I mean, yeah, the way I tell it when I'm talking to my reps, explain that dynamic is you've got to forget that you're in the room. It's not you, it's them 600 members in your case in that room. You're just a conduit for them. And 600 people getting pissed off and withdrawing the Labour tends to have a much bigger impact than one guy who sits in an office all day.
Yeah, you know what? They're the conversations I have with members as well. Lee Hunter, who's our brigade chair. We are both incredibly passionate. I don't always necessarily agree with every policy that's put in place by my own union. If I don't agree with it, I don't agree with it generally on behalf of our members. We are incredibly passionate and have been from the outset that every single union should be a members-led union. It shouldn't be led from the top down. It should be led from the bottom up. And it's good that you use almost exactly the same phrase that we use. We say to members on a daily basis, we're not here to tell you what to do. We're your conduit to the bosses. You tell us what you want. We'll give you our advice. We'll tell you whether we believe it's achievable. But ultimately, you instruct us, you mandate us. We will go and, to the best of our ability, carry out those wishes.
With the new legislation that they've just got in with I think they're calling it the minimum service level legislation. I'd like to call it the Conscription of Labour Act. But how's that going to specifically affect firefighters?
Yeah, obviously the MSL legislation is, it's a concern for all workers. At the end of the day, and I watched the Tory minister on the telly the other day talking about ASLEF and talking about how, the MSL legislation will protect members of the public from unnecessary strikes. I won't tell you what I said to the TV whilst he was on it. But ultimately, this idea that, workers anywhere are just frivolously taking strike action, that, we haven't got bills to pay, that we haven't got families to support, and all that sort of stuff. And we're just happy to throw caution to the wind, just for a day off, for a bit of a jolly. It's absolutely unbelievable. I mean, in respect to firefighters, the legislation hasn't been laid for for firefighters. I was made aware that when they were talking about our fire control strike, some of the legislation they were discussing for ambulance control centres was minimum service level would be 100%. So essentially, as you said, it is conscription. You're not allowed to withdraw your labour. Our position is, as a national union, that we will fight this. I know Matt Rack has spoken at the TUC. He's spoken alongside Mick Lynch, discussing, non-compliance, essentially, should they seek to, bring this, terrible anti-worker legislation in. We actually have standing national policy in the FBU. So our national policy is dictated by our annual conference. In 2016, Mark Rowe, who was the brigade secretary for Merseyside Fire Brigades Unit at that time, moved and passed a resolution at our national conference that should any government come for our right to strike, that can only be met with, a recall conference, and I would essentially say a ballot for strike to fight that.
That's interesting, yeah. It is. If they make it sort of illegal to do these things properly, they put us in a position where you've kind of got to start breaking the law. If they make any sort of resistance illegal, then they've kind of put us in a corner, and it's what they get is what they deserve.
Well, I'd like to think though as well, if they're going to drive workers to the point where carrying out what is arguably a human right illegal, well, then surely all the rest of the legislation goes out of the window with it. You're not going to illegally break the minimum service level criteria and then still give the notice periods, or still publish do ballots through the legal channels. Because if you're going to be illegal, you're going to be illegal anyway, aren't you?
You're pushing people back in the direction of wildcats, and whatever else that comes along with that. You both know yourselves how restrictive the anti-trade union laws are in this country. We have some of the worst trade union or anti-trade union laws, in Europe. It is not as simple as, I go into work on a Monday morning and by Tuesday afternoon I've thrown my toys out the pram and we hit the gates. We can't do that. There's rafts and rafts of legislation that we have to cope with. There's huge amounts of red tape and everything, that comes along with that. What gets portrayed when you turn on the telly by, that Tory minister, I won't name, and, I won't tell you what it was, I shouted at the TV when he came on and said it. It is portrayed that, we are just a bunch of work shy lefties who, just can't be bothered. We've got it, we've got it good. And, this is one of the things. No one ever talks about the public sector and public sector pay when the private sector's doing well. No one's ever looking at us with our gold-plated pensions, and whatever, our second jobs and anything else like that. when they're, everything's going well in the private sector. As soon as they start to feel a little bit of pain, all eyes turn to the public sector, because it's us that's taken everything from society. It's us that making everybody's life miserable, with our strikes and everything else that we do on a daily basis.
They also don't seem to see the irony when one of the ministers has now resigned from his position because he couldn't afford to pay his mortgage. They don't seem to see the irony that, there's lots of people have mortgages, lots of workers have mortgages, but they don't seem to see, it's the same thing. They don't seem to recognise that, do they?
Yeah, it's the effect of these actions, on working men and women. How much money did Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng wipe off the economy, literally overnight, that we're now all still feeling the pain for? As you said, I remortgaged at the back end of last year. I'm lucky enough to have my own house. I'm lucky enough to be able to afford me bills. There were struggles sometimes. Yeah, would I like a bit more money? Yeah, but I can afford to pay the bills. My mortgage went up by £200 a month, overnight, and I've absorbed it. And again, I'm lucky enough to be in the position that I can pay it. But you listen to some people who, we've started doing some work with the Whitechapel Centre in Liverpool. And this is a charity who work with homeless people. They try to look at the causes and the root of homelessness. They try to assist people into accommodation. When it drops below freezing, they send people out. This is all charity to try and bring people in off the street. So our AGM last year, we decided we were going to try and partner with a local charity, see what we could do to assist and to try and raise some awareness. But you start digging through the stats, you start looking at the stuff that shelters, put out recently. When they talk about, working people, you're potentially a paycheck away from losing the roof over your head. And, all of us, I think, are guilty of this at some point. We distance ourselves from, people who may be homeless, may be struggling. It's because it's dehumanized, and it's this natural thing of, it can't happen to me. When we're going back there, you say the minister who's, can't afford to pay his mortgage, probably spends his time walking through life, walking past people who are struggling, walking past people who his policies or her policies have probably put in, dire straits, thinking it's okay, it can't happen to me, they're different to me. But this idea, when I say the stats that Shelter put out around, you're a paycheck away. You're essentially your washing machine or breaking away from losing your house. Or I think from a trade union point of view, you're a bad meeting with your boss away from not being able to pay your bills, away from not being able to feed your family. Because we've seen reps, we've seen officials over the last couple of years where we've had a lot of trade union movement, even in Liverpool. We've seen trade union reps sacked. We have seen people lose their jobs. And, it's a perilous time to be. As much as we've had a resurgence over the last couple of years, I think has been a perilous time to be a trade union official, in as much as you may go into work one day, you may say or do the wrong thing, and find you're not going into work the next day.
Oh, I can 100% resonate with that, mate. Speaking as someone who's been moved out of 2 workplaces for trade union activity. It always seems to be the loud ones who, and the effective trade union reps who are the ones targeted as well. It's never the ones sort of doing favours for the brass. But yeah. So just going back to politics, mainstream sort of party politics, what would you like to see from an incoming government? Just talk us through that Firefighters Manifesto you talked about.
Yeah, it's about refunding and revitalising the fire and rescue services. So, we've lost like 20% of firefighter jobs across the UK since 2010. It is about looking at the role of a firefighter and what we do now. So it's about finding that statutory funding, ensuring that we are paid for the sort of climate related incidents we go to, flooding, all that kind of stuff now. It is essentially, in essence, about us getting a fire service that is fit for purpose, you know, that is fully funded, and that we have the ability to continue doing the job that we do on a daily basis.
And where would you? Is it published as well? Is it published outside of the union? Is it something
Yeah,
that
you can find it on the Fire Brigades Union's website.
Excellent. So, how likely do you think it is that these sort of things will be delivered to him?
I don't know, to be entirely honest with you. You know, we're obviously in a state of political flux at this moment in time. I think we can probably all agree that at long last we've got a Tory party in death throes. You know, the question is, you know, who comes behind them? Again, you know, I've had these conversations with Sean before. You know, I actually moved a disaffiliation from the Labour Party resolution a couple of years ago at our national conference. You know, and this was off the back of, you know, the actions of Keir Starmer, obviously being from Liverpool, you know, the writing for the Sun newspaper, you know, something which he told members, you know, he told people in Liverpool that he would never do. You know, it's not something that we forget. You know, it's not something that disappears. And the idea of, you know, a Labour leader not only writing for the Sun, but inviting them to Labour Party conference, you know, that's absolutely deplorable. But what we need is, you know, we need a Labour Party that are willing to, you know, nail the colours to the mast, rather than, you know, sort of caught in the big business votes, rather than, you know, the soft policies. You know, again, you know, we've had discussions around the MSL in the minimum service levels. You know, that is something that, you know, the Labour Party have said that, you know, Keir Starmer has said that if they get into office, you know, if they get into power, they will repeal that within the first 100 days. Now, for us as a trade union, you know, that is, you know, it's absolutely huge. You know, again, nationally, you know, the Fire Brigades Union, you know, we are an affiliated member of the Labour Party. You know, we're an affiliated trade union, you know, we are supportive of the Labour Party. And I think, you know, again, when we attempted to move a disaffiliation reso, you know, we were roundly overturned on it by our annual conference. It's about us holding to account, I think, you know, the Labour leadership that there is now. And I think that's probably a job for all trade unions, because, you know, they need the votes of working men and women. You know, we can all agree we need the Tories out. You know, I don't think there's any disagreement there, but we need to ensure that, you know, whichever party comes in behind them, you know, isn't just going to be Tory light. You know, we need a party that is going to work for working people, rather than, you know, slipping back into New Labour big business.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, just speaking personally, without any sort of hat on, the one thing that I'd absolutely love to see is, and the only thing, to be honest, I think you sort this, the rest slips into place, but just resetting anti-trade union legislation to 1980, take the shackles off the union movement, and you haven't got to worry about minimum pay, minimum wage and stuff like that. We take the shackles off us, we'll do the rest. Let us do what we do best again, without that sort of needless weight tied around our ankles.
Yeah, agreed.
It's an odd thing to want to legislate for cuts to services that everybody relies upon, isn't it? You know, not just the fire service, but all public services, because it seems an odd thing to me. You know, if it is just looking at the fire service, do rich folk not want their house to be saved if a fire breaks out? Do they not want to be cut out of their much more expensive than mine, but still, do they not want to be cut out of their car? What is it that goes through their head when they cast that ballot, thinking, do you know what we need? Less of things. It doesn't seem to make cognitive sense to me.
No, it's strange, and I think, you know, going back to that sort of thing about the disconnect, about, you know, whether it's people who are struggling in society, you know, walk past someone who's homeless on the streets, and it can't happen to you. You know, it does track that, you know, we find, you know, a higher occurrence of fires, within areas of high social deprivation. We see more intervention from, other emergency services within areas of high social deprivation. In a nice, sleepy, little hamlet somewhere in the country, they may have a fire at some point, but it doesn't happen as frequently and they're not as exposed to it. I think they're insulated from it. But ultimately, everybody is at risk. Everybody, stands to lose if we don't have a fire and rescue service, that is fit for purpose. I used to describe it to people like, if you drive everywhere, you never take the bus, but you've got a really good bus service where you live. You don't really care because you don't use it. However, on that one day when you come to use it and the bus doesn't turn up, you can bet that person will be telling everyone who'll listen about how terrible the public transport is in that area and how they missed their meeting and how it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's the same with the fire service. You might not use us for your entire life, and genuinely, I hope you don't. But on that day where you do, you want us there, you want us quickly, and you want us fully staffed so we can come and help with whatever it is you need help with.
Yeah, back to the deprivation thing as well. I think it's absolutely obviously a tragedy, but Grenfell being in one of the richest constituencies in the country and what was allowed to happen there, sort of lords and ladies living up the road from it in the big massive houses down there in Kensington, and then this just absolute failure from government and authorities to do the right thing, and just in the name of making money. And that's, I think, where we're at. It's capital and profit driven above just let's look after people.
And in labelling the insulation as a sort of fire resistant thing, which was just absolutely a criminal act. And from memory, I don't think anybody's faced any kind of jail time or consequence because of that.
No, and this is the problem, isn't it? And this is what happens when you get deregulation, within legislation, and you allow big business to come in. We have housing builders, who essentially pay, the safety inspector, all that sort of stuff that goes on. You look into the stuff around Grenfell, or, you look into the stuff around the post office scandal, all these things, and you see right the way through that people were ringing the alarm bells. They were ringing them loudly, in Grenfell in particular. The reams and reams of complaints about unsafe practices, about things that weren't being addressed by the housing association, and they were just roundly ignored. And they were ignored for the simple reason that they're not rich. They were ignored because their voice doesn't matter, because they're not wealthy. And that is the society we live in at this moment in time. We have a government, we have the people who run this country, that unless you are wealthy, you do not have a voice. And I think this is the thing about joining a trade union, and some of the stuff we were discussing before, is that when you are shouting by yourself, nobody listens to you. All of a sudden, when there's 10, 20, 30, 40, however many thousand of you all shouting together, people have no choice but to listen to you.
And I would say something that has to cut across the movement. It won't be something that comes new to you, Ian, but that the cross-union solidarity has to come to the fore as well, especially when you look at especially some of the smaller workplaces and trade unions, I suppose. But it needs, in some cases, it needs mass action, doesn't it? It needs the whole movement to come together to push for some of these things. Legislative change being one of them.
Yeah, and it's it's so difficult to sort of to get this cohesion and to get this forward momentum. We look at when Jeremy Corbyn was in his ascendancy, when people started to get on board, you're starting to see people who young people who weren't working in unionised industries, who started to understand the idea of what socialism looks like. Started to ask the question and say, well, hang on a minute, what you've been espousing or what I've been told for however many years, that's not socialism. It's not about taking off people who can't afford, all that sort of stuff. But the problem we have on the left, I think, historically, is that, you know, we struggle to fight together. You know, there's moments in history where we have managed to get ourselves to the point where we have stood up together and we have managed to affect change. But on the whole, you know, we struggle to have that cohesion. And that is the, you know, and again, as much as it pains me to say it, the one thing the right does well up until a point is they come together to give us a kicking. And then once they've finished that, they go back to attacking each other. And, you know, the left, we need, as you say, to get that sort of cross-party, cross-union, cross-worker support for us to all stand together rather than bickering amongst ourselves over, you know, individual ideology or how something is done. And, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson we should have learned in the 80s with the miners. That's a battle I'm convinced we could have absolutely won if the unions had been working together a bit better, if the TUC at the time hadn't failed us massively, and other certain groups. It's a lesson that we should have learned and don't seem to have learned.
Yeah.
It's how do we get to that place, do you think, either of you, where we all are getting better at working together? Because there does seem to still be these divides amongst certain unions not working together and seeming more interested in being at each other's throats. Probably slightly different in your sort of sector, Ian, because you're the dominant union, where sort of both myself and George are in a union which is sort of in competition with some other general unions.
Well, I know that you know, there's sometimes the temptation to only look at the thing that's in front of you, to only, you know, we're getting, you know, disputes that we can't avoid thrust upon us in some cases, and legislation thrust upon us that we can't avoid. But we do need to make time for solidarity. We do need to look at you know, it should be the automatic position of anybody in the working class to say, if they're coming after you, I'll stand by your side. It should be the automatic position. And the other side to that is that when it's your turn that somebody's coming after you, they will inevitably stand by your side, won't they? It doesn't seem to be a hard concept to grasp, and I think it's quite instinctive to a lot of people. You know, even if they haven't been switched on politically, I think it's sort of a natural standpoint of workers. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I guess this is the thing, isn't it? If you look through history, you know, when we have done things right, you know, when we have managed to, you know, get ourselves to the point where, you know, we overthrow whoever it is, you know, throw off the oppressors, you know, we affect some sort of change. There's always, you know, a point that's brought us to that. You know, I guess one of the things we've discussed tonight, which affects pretty much every worker, is this MSL, you know, these minimum service level standards. You know, I suppose when we talk about repealing all anti-trade union laws and roll it back to the 80s, I absolutely agree with you, you know, and I'd like to see that on a manifesto, you know, of an incoming Labour Party, that is what, you know, they're choosing to do. But I suppose it's probably an abstract concept for a lot of people who wouldn't understand what that, you know, raft of anti-union legislation actually entails. I guess, you know, you could look at something as a rallying cry for all unions, and I know there are conversations going on through the TUC right now around this minimal service levels, because that will affect each and every worker in every single unionised workplace. We will essentially be told, and this is, you know, how far-reaching this stuff is. You know, not only can an employer decide what they believe the minimum service levels to be, they get to pick who comes to work. So within the fire and rescue service, you know, if the FBU call a strike, the employer could essentially come to me, come to our brigade chair, come to our union officials and say, oh no, we're choosing you to come to work. And if this law is allowed to go through, you know, if they're allowed to continue in the vein that they are, that is what they will do. You know, and they will use it to drive wedges, you know, within the unions who are trying to fight them.
And the mission creep's already started as well, because I believe it's trying to be utilised against is it Hitachi, who are people who make trains. They're not even rail operators. So it's just before they said it's for a very limited section of people in a very limited set of circumstances. It's already, before it's even been used, already being stretched in definition. And obviously, if it's a roaring success, there's only another piece of legislation to say widen it to these workers as well.
Yeah, and you watch the creep on everything, and people talk about the paranoia about handing powers to government. You talk about the paranoia, the rafts of legislation that came in through COVID, that have now sort of spawned, the public order legislation and stuff like that, which are massively curtailing our right to peaceful protest. You look at the stuff, around the world, and this is what always happens, off the back of COVID. We knew this was going to happen. If either of you ever read Naomi Klein's Shock Doctrine, where they talk about, governments and, global forces using economic or, environmental or, human disaster to drive change. Look at the Patriot Act that came in America. They've been fighting to bring that in pre 9/11 for years. And people have said, it was an attack on the freedoms of, normal working people. However, after 9/11, people clambered over themselves to allow this legislation to be imposed. When we came through COVID, which was the sort of genesis of, the Public Order Act and stuff like that we have now, people were saying again, no, it's right that we should be told that we can't do this and we can't do this. Oh, no, it's right. There's no point repealing it. Now it's in. Now we see, discussions around peaceful protesters getting sent to prison, for causing a nuisance. At the end of the day, what is the point to protest if it doesn't cause disruption?
Absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting as well. It's the language they use around like the Patriot Act. Like if you're against this, you're not a patriot. Or the police crime and sentencing bill, where it isn't. It's about just nicking people and locking them up for doing very little. But just using that language of police crime sentencing, it's most people are going to think, oh yeah, we should be tougher on them criminals, sort of trying to ruin our lives. But yeah, the language is interesting, and you're right. It's if we allow them to sort of bring these things in, it's what's next, because we're not far away from strikes being illegal now. In my opinion, there's that many hurdles to jump through. This next one, for certain sectors, it will become illegal. They'll find a way to make it even more brutal afterwards.
Well, just with the sort of the language that's used as well, Sean, because again, the minimum service level act, not the force workers to scab their own picket line act.
Yeah. It's also interesting that there's no sort of minimum service levels for the NHS on non-strike days. They're happy to run with reduced crews. With the FBU there, they're talking about reducing you down to three people to an appliance. There's no minimum service levels there, is there? It's only when you decide you're going to go on strike that they need you all in.
Yeah, Jay, I was just going to say pretty much exactly what you've said there. On any given day, there are, people working in all sorts of different public sector industries who are working well below not only the agreed minimum, but the minimum of what is safe and what the public are paying for. Yet, when we were to go out the door on strike, you might find the workplace is actually better staffed than it is any other day of the week.
Yeah, I know that was some of the ambulance drivers were talking about the paramedics while they were on strike, that actually on strike days they were much more effective because there wasn't any of the nonsense stuff going on calls, and they had agreed a few of them would go in to cover emergencies, and they were actually meeting the targets for the first time in about a year during them strike days. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, agreed. And this is the thing. Obviously, working within the emergency services, you see the stretch everywhere else. You see, talk about mental health. We're living in an age of huge mental health crisis, and there simply is not the slack within the system to deal with people. There is not there isn't the levels of care there that people deserve. When I first started working in the fire and rescue service, if we were to go out and we were to encounter someone who was having a mental ill health crisis, whatever that may be, there was someone we could ring. We could get somebody from a crisis team out. They could be assessed. They could be, taken to somewhere, to provide them with care. That for a lot of places and for a lot of people simply doesn't exist anymore. I think people going through, a period of, poor mental health or who are in mental health crisis, I think a lot of the time the best they can hope for is a night in a prison cell, which, somewhere they can't harm themselves, but really is not the best place for that person. We need staffed hospitals, we need people who are trained to deal with people in these emergencies. The same as I touched on before about, when we have an ambulance service, that is, at the point of collapse at busy periods, and people then seek to paper over the cracks by sending somebody else. They seek to paper over the cracks by sending a fire engine. They seek to paper over the cracks by what's the I can't remember it now, it's just escaped me mind, the new clinicians posts that are being brought in for people who, you're not a doctor but you essentially act as a doctor. The name of it escapes me now.
Can't remember myself.
But yeah, it's downgrading these levels of care. It's downgrading what people need. I think conversation we have with a lot of people is anything getting any cheaper? And you say, what do you mean? And you go, okay, well, if you live within this constituency, 10 years ago you paid £5 for your fire service a month. You used to get 2 fire appliances. It would turn out with 10 firefighters in total. You're now paying, again, probably double that, and you're now getting less than half that. Where else, and it's the same for everything, it's the same for all public services. Where else would you continue, a council tax, everything like that? Where would you continue to pay more and more and more and more on a yearly basis to get less and less and less and less?
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, you talked about the mental health crises and stuff at the time. I don't really see it like that. I think with the amount of cuts and austerity, them early interventions have disappeared now, and support services, which probably would have stopped people getting to that sort of crisis point, they're gone. And then you're relying on the charity sector to pick up a lot of the work, which is often difficult for people to access or even find how to get in there. And then on top of that, like you said, we've got now cuts to the NHS, cuts to the fire service, cuts to policing, cuts to local authorities everywhere. Who are the people who are going to respond and try and pick up these things? It's more pressure put on. So some millionaires who Rishi Sunak used to work with can pay a bit less tax and sort of spirit the rest of the money away to the Bahamas.
Where does it end, though, as well, when you've got such disparity, when you've got such an unequal society, when none of the consequences of that matter, because it doesn't matter that the NHS is going down the pan because you can pay for your own private healthcare. It doesn't matter that the police can't respond to calls because we can pay for private security on our gated neighbourhood. So when those things have no consequence for a certain section of society, it leads to this, it's like we live in 2 separate countries within the same country, isn't it? With different priorities, because we're not all using the same or needing to use the same services that the vast majority of people rely on, and it just can't end in a good way, that ever increasing gap between the very wealthiest and all the rest in the country, can it?
No, and that's Sean used the example before of Grenfell, in one of the richest boroughs within the United Kingdom, and literally we had people who couldn't pay the bills, were struggling to make ends meet, were complaining about substandard housing, literally within a stone's throw of multi-millionaire, and that is the sort of juxtaposition that we've got now, isn't it? That we have a very small minority who have absolutely everything and seem to operate. Look at everything that's come out following COVID. Look at the PPE. Look at all the money that was spent and wasted, the money that was funneled into VIP lanes, because people had had a nod and a wink, people setting up companies, never produced any PPE in their lives, being handed, hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money. The people in 10 Downing Street dancing on the tables, whilst everybody else sat at home, you know, and missed the funerals of loved ones, you know, missed the last moments of loved ones. And, you know, there are no consequence for those people. You know, they come on the TV, they come to inquiries, and they walk out the backside of it, you know, with no, you know, there is no comeuppance, is there?
That's it. Yeah, I think the mad thing is we see people like Matt Hancock and get away with procurement nonsense, going to his mates and stuff. But what brings him down is touching someone up in Down Street. It's absolutely mad. That same with Boris. It wasn't completely mismanaging things and leading to hundreds of thousands of people's deaths. It was having a party. It's the press is absolutely wild on what they choose to go after these people for and not. And it should be they're taking the piss out of us as a class and completely just not holding up to their side of the deal. We're meant to elect these people to represent us. They're clearly representing a different class of people. They're not the people who often even live in this country. They're the people who exploit labour and extort wealth from us all. But we've come to the end there. So have you got anything to say before we get off, Ian? Anything you want to write?
Thanks very much for having me on. It was great talking to you both.
Well, thanks for coming.
No, excellent. So thanks, everyone. And this has been What's Left. Take care.
Yeah, guys.